My name is Tony Tyso. This story is written by me. It's called The Green Bikini Top. From where we live at one end of a winding, flat-bottomed valley, tucked in amongst the thickly wooded slopes of Los Gavaras, which at this time of the year emerge from out of the early morning mists like floating clumps of giant calabreses, it takes me half an hour to drive into the university, 10 minutes to get to the other end of the valley, 15 minutes cruising the highway that runs the length of this central part of the Costa Brava, and 5 minutes more edging through traffic-choked suburbs before I can finally cut the engine and sit for a moment in silence with the car stationary beneath the towering walls of Girona's old quarter. The best part of the journey is crossing the valley. There are orchards on both sides of the single-track road, and vineyards and wheat fields. Macias with low roofs and thick stone walls shelter behind copses of eucalyptus and pine. In spring, I drive past meadows bursting with the most vivid colours, as if it is the colours themselves that have seeded in the red, fertile earth. There is all manner of wildlife: foxes, red squirrels, wild boar. At the beginning of autumn, a pair of buzzards took up residence. They wheel and turn now on the warm upcurrents from dawn to dusk, their familiar silhouettes visible for miles around. Few outsiders come to our valley, save for the Africans who ride in on patched-up bicycles looking for work. We don't stop to consider how they get here or the stricken villages they might have come from, because we've largely lost that way of thinking about things. And that is not all that has changed in us since we arrived in this place and slowed down and started wondering how the course of our lives might look in years to come, under the unblinking gaze of eternity. The first puta arrived at the side of the highway one Monday morning, about 2 months ago. She was standing at a well-chosen spot just before the airport turn-off, on the edge of a bamboo grove near a track leading to an abandoned farmhouse where her clients could turn off the road and park unseen. As I drove past, I was thinking about the lecture I was due to give that morning and almost missed her. The title of the lecture, in case it is felt to be of significance, was The Spanish Civil War and its Aftermath, the Death of Reason on the Battlefield of Ideas. The next day, she was joined by a friend. They wore the same clothes: short yellow skirts, white boots, and high-necked fluffy jumpers with shiny satin jackets. The following morning, the first puta, undeniably the prettier of the two, caught my eye as I drew level with her and waved, not a cheerful wave, but a commanding gesture she must have brought with her from wherever she came from. I was considering this when I had to swerve to avoid knocking off his bicycle an African, pedalling along at the side of the road, going in the same direction as me. I saw him wobble in my slipstream. The reproach in his eyes lingered in my rear mirror as I drew away from him and continued on my journey. From then on, the putas were at their posts every day, unless the weather was particularly bad. They brought white plastic chairs from somewhere, and then replaced them with more comfortable ones upholstered in fake red leather. Usually they sat apart, but once when I drove by, the second one was perched on the pretty one's lap. They had their heads close together and were bent over what I guessed was a mobile phone. They were laughing and looked very happy. Hoopoes are a regular sight on grass verges in this part of Catalonia. They are elegant birds with a striking plumage, but the book of Leviticus tells us to shun them because they are unclean and foul their nests. I was reminded of this when it became obvious the pooters were fouling their nests too. They hung carrier bags from the bamboo canes behind the chairs, left plastic water bottles lying on the ground, and carelessly discarded scraps of toilet paper that became snagged in the grass. I got used to the sight of them on my daily journey and grew to look forward to their appearance as the spot where they stood drew near. Sometimes I only saw one of them and was anxious for the rest of the day about the other, though I felt slightly embarrassed about this and told myself not to be ridiculous. Then, about a week ago now, though it seems longer, the weather became freakishly warm and the pooters changed with it. The pretty one suddenly took to wearing her thick chestnut hair lifted up off the nape of her neck instead of over her shoulders. And the next day, she had shed her satin jacket and fluffy jumper in favour of a bikini top, which I was astonished to see was exactly the same shade of dark green as a swimming costume my wife had picked from a rail outside a boutique on the Corniche of Beirut back in 1982 or 1983, and had brought with my enthusiastic approval. This association of places and objects was very strong, as well as disorienting, because my wife and I haven't talked about those days in Beirut for 10 years or more. It goes without saying the swimming costume from the boutique on the Corniche is long gone, but the fact is that for the rest of that day, the pooter and her dark green bikini top filled my thoughts and destroyed my concentration. Work was all but impossible. At one point during the morning, I even imagined asking her if she had chosen the colour herself or if it had been chosen for her, and my lips moved as I framed the question. That same evening, I set off back home later than normal. As I drove, my head felt heavy, and I heard myself repeating the harsh words I had directed at one of my younger faculty colleagues before leaving the university building. It had started as a trivial argument over the basis on which the fictionalization of real events might ever be justified. We had been discussing a young man, a former drug addict, who had written a bestseller purporting to be the true story of his life. He now stood accused of making most of it up. His publishers were under attack. The media were making hay with the spat. The young man, who was American, had even made an appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show. My argument with my colleague followed predictable lines. Her position was that in such cases, truth per se, her expression, was not the important consideration. The only criterion by which a writer's integrity should be judged was what she called the truthiness of their work. The concept of truthiness encompassed the essential latitude every writer must be allowed when portraying real events, she proclaimed, with evident satisfaction at her choice of words. At first, I did not reveal my true feelings, but merely remarked that as far as I was concerned, there was no halfway house when truth, or what we were pleased to describe as real events, was under discussion. It was only later, when my young adversary, who, like the author she was defending, was American, implied that I had an authoritarian nature, comparing me with those academics of the 30s who abandoned their independence and clambered aboard the Soviet realism bandwagon, that my language became intemperate. Do you have any idea at all what awaits us in this profession if we abandon true and accurate detail as our ethical yardstick? I asked her, in a raised voice, I regret to say. At that, she levelled Jean Genet's notorious quotation from The Thief's Journal at me. Here are the loves which I have been preoccupied with. Having noted them, I now make use of them. May they serve the purpose of this book. Surely you would agree that Genet is speaking for all writers there, she said. She was completely ignorant, of course. Sartre called The Thief's Journal Genet's most beautiful book, the Dichtung und Wahrheit of homosexuality. It has a wider timbre than any other confessional autobiography I know of. To continue arguing with this young lady would, I was certain, be completely pointless. Even so, I persisted. Novelists, perhaps, and probably governments, but not us, I hope. Ah, I see, she said, with a truly infuriating smile. I should have known better, of course, but I was angry and I couldn't stop myself. You don't see anything, I said. By now, I fear I may have been shouting. Poetry and truth in a book by Genet is one thing. Truthiness and your fucking country's foreign policy for the last 40 years is quite another. Let's leave it at that, shall we? She had answered, reasonably enough. The sun was already low in the sky, and there was no sign of the pooters when I passed the spot where they always stood. Without planning to, I slowed down, and then found to my surprise that I had stopped completely. As I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, wondering what to do in this unexpected situation, I can now see that by then my judgment was almost certainly clouded by my approaching bout of illness. The reflection of a container lorry began to fill my rear mirror alarmingly quickly before the real thing passed in a rush of wind with its horn blaring, leaving my car rocking violently. I hurriedly pulled onto the side of the road, turned off the engine, and set out to walk the 50 yards back along the road in the direction I had come. It was a curious thing, but as I walked, I heard no noise from the passing traffic. All was silence until I reached the track that led to the abandoned farmhouse and stopped before the 2 chairs of fake red leather, still set at what was no doubt the correct angle to the road. The only sound now was the rustling of the bamboo canes, stirring in the evening breeze. I noticed the patch-up bicycle thrown down carelessly behind a bush a few yards from the chairs before I heard them. A woman was singing softly in a language I did not recognize. A man was making low animal noises. I took a few steps backward and parted the bamboo screen. The pretty one was lying on her back and gazing at me from over a man's broad, rippling shoulders, smiling as if she had been expecting me. She said something I did not understand, but knew was not directed at me, though all the time her eyes were fastened on mine. The other pooter raised her head then. It occurred to me I was looking at 3 people adrift on an old mattress in a sea of trampled bamboo, holding on to each other for survival. It was a big mattress and would have been awkward to carry. I wondered what help the pooters had needed to get it there. These were the things that I saw, and these were the thoughts that came to me at the time. It was only later that I thought of Freud's visit to the Acropolis as a young man and began to consider anew the effects of the condition of disassociation on a character like mine. It is true that I did have a momentary feeling I might finally be on the edge of a breakthrough of understanding, but it did not last. And I'm quite certain that on reflection, this was for the best, and that it was something I had somehow half realized even while I was standing there. It would, after all, have been irresponsible in the extreme and selfish not to have recognized that at our stage of life, such a breakthrough would only have come at a very heavy price. I may have cried out. I'm not sure, as I stood on the edge of that bamboo grove, but I do clearly remember stumbling backwards and the man rolling on to his side and turning his face towards mine, and I do remember seeing the familiar reproach in his eyes as he did so. That night I slept badly and dreamt of birds with dark green feathers and a silver plane falling towards me from out of a blue sky. By the morning, a fever had taken hold, and I asked my wife to phone the faculty secretary to say I would need a week off work. Later, she sat on the edge of the bed and we talked. She said I'd been working too hard, and I did not disagree with her. Perhaps in the weeks ahead, we will talk some more, and I will be able to explain to her something of how I feel, and she will understand. Yesterday, I returned to work. When I drove past the spot where the Pooters had stood, by the side of the bamboo grove just before the airport turn-off, they had gone. They were not there today either. But I did see a group of Africans riding into our valley on their patched-up bicycles this morning. And this evening, the buzzards were wheeling and turning in the open skies above me, visible for miles around. I shall look out for them tomorrow, too.